This Tales of Rebirth retrospective was brought to you by my lovely patrons on Patreon. For as little as $3 Australian a month, you can get your name shouted at the start of every Xenosanctum video, as well as access to bonus behind the scenes content. When it came to making these Tales retrospectives, I found myself really excited to try out the Tales games which I had yet to play. Of these games, Tales of Rebirth was by far the one that interested me the most. I know it was fellow Australian Tales fan JRPG's most requested remake, and the concept of a 2D/3D hybrid battle system sounded awesome. So finally playing this elusive Tales game, is the excitement worth it? Well, let's find out as we look back on 2004's Tales of Rebirth on the PS2. In 2002, with Tales of Destiny 2's development wrapping up, Team Destiny found themselves with two choices: either merge back with Team Symphonia and help them finish their game, or begin working on a new Tales game to release shortly after Tales of Symphonia. The answer would come in the form of Tales of Destiny 2's record sales, showing that even at the fraction of the manpower, Team Destiny could make a top tier Tales game. Thus work would begin on a brand new Tales game to release in 2004. With Tales of Symphonia's 3D game engine yet to be finalised, Team Destiny would once again have to rely on the series' aging 2D engine. However, not wanting to make another Tales of Destiny 2, the team instead came up with the idea of multiple 2D planes which the player and enemies could freely move between mid-battle. This would allow for a pseudo 3D battle system while keeping the sharp focused gameplay of the former 2D titles. When it came to the story, writer Hiramatsu Masaki would look to the ethnic conflicts occurring in the then collapsing state of Yugoslavia. This encouraged him to write a story about two races, the humanoid Huma and the beast-like Gajuma, who used to coexist in peace until events would push the two races into conflict in a similar manner to Yugoslavia in the 1990s. Designing these two races would once again fall to series veteran Mutsumi Inamata, who was free thanks to not being involved with Symphonia's development. While the Huma characters would prove to be relatively easy to create, Inamata would struggle with the Gajuma characters, opting to initially draw them as humans before adding the animal-like features. Ichi Kikuchi and Kiyoshi Nagai would come over from Team Symphonia to oversee and direct the game, along with one Akiyoshi Sarukawa. With the story focusing around trying to recreate a divided society, the spiritual idea of rebirth came to the forefront. Thus the name Tales of Rebirth was chosen, along with the characteristic genre of RPG where you will be reborn. Tales of Rebirth would release in Japan in December 2004, shortly after the Western release of Tales of Symphonia. With Symphonia being a massive success in the West, rumours began to circulate that Rebirth would be localized too. These rumours unfortunately would never come to fruition, and Tales of Rebirth to this day remains a Japanese exclusive. However, with Lumina Tales translating Tales of Destiny 2 and Lifebottle Productions translating the Destiny 1 Director's Cut, we should hopefully have a Rebirth fan translation in a year or two. But much like with Tales of Destiny 2, today I will be playing the original untranslated PS2 release from 2004. The story begins in the royal capital of Balka. Here we see the frail king Ladris Lindblum as he looks out at the sun whose light slowly begins to drain out of it. In a panic, the king attempts to use his power to fix whatever is going on. Yeah, I'm kinda confused. He is then approached by his two generals, Eugene Galando and Milhurst Selkirk, who try to stop him but are too late as the king unleashes his power across the world, causing people to... Oh my, jeez. What's the rating on this game again? Anyway, after these horrific scenes, we jump to the small village of Suluz, where we see our protagonist, Vag Lundberg, in a panic as his power is going out of control. His friend Claire Bennett tries to help, but is accidentally hit by Vag's power and is frozen in a pillar of ice. A year later, we see Claire still frozen in a pillar of ice as Vag stands guard hoping for a miracle to break her free, when suddenly two figures approach, Eugene and his companion Mal. The two explain that they have come to help Vag and recruit him on a mission, to which Vag is dismissive and explains that they cannot help him. In response, Mal challenges Vag to a fight and takes Vag completely by surprise with his ability to control fire. After the fight, Mal explains that the power they are using is called Force, and a recent cataclysm has caused multiple Huma to gain Force powers. Team Destiny, I know you like to homage Star Wars, but this is blatant plagiarism. Anyway, Mao is able to use his force to break Claire free of the ice pillar. Claire is initially startled, but is brought up to speed on what has happened. Despite being responsible for her imprisonment, Claire holds no ill regard to Vague, and the four decide to go visit Claire's parents and tell her the good news. At Claire's house, Eugene and Mao bring Vague up to speed on what has been happening around the world, when suddenly a commotion starts in front of the town hall. The four run over to see troops from the King's Shield led by Torma of the Four Stars. They are seizing the town's young ladies. Upon seeing Claire, Torma demands that Claire surrender herself over to them. When Vague refuses, a fight breaks out between him and Torma, to which Torma is victorious. Suddenly Sully of the Four Stars appears, and using his force of storm threatens to kill the townsfolk if Claire doesn't surrender herself. While Claire agrees to surrender herself over, Vague attempts to attack Sully, but is knocked out by Eugene. When Vague comes to his senses, he finds himself with Eugene and Mao, and the King's Shield is gone. Eugene explains that Sully was too powerful, and had Vague engaged him, he surely would have died. Furious that he has lost Claire so soon after finally getting her back, Vague offers to join the two to chase down the King's Shield and rescue Claire, and with that the three head out on a long adventure across the world to save Claire and the other young ladies captured by the King's Shield. Unfortunately for those wanting the full story breakdown, much like with Tales of Destiny 2, you're kind of out of luck and will either have to play the game or wait for the inevitable fan translation to come out. With the game using the 2D Tales engine, we once again see the return of 2D isometric towns and character sprites previously seen in Tales of Destiny 2. However, Team Destiny has now pushed this engine to its limits to deliver an almost 3D Tales game experience. They have done this by lowering the camera angle to a more horizontal view than previously seen in Eternia and Destiny 2. With this, the character sprites now dynamically grow and shrink as the player approaches / moves away from the camera. As a result, Tales of Rebirth truly does feel like a 3D Tales game in a lot of ways. If pseudo 3D towns and dungeons aren't good enough for you, Team Destiny once again uses a fully 3D overworld. While the 3D characters look much better than their Destiny 2 counterparts, I still detest the inconsistent art style, in which Team Destiny would just commit to either using 2D sprites or 3D models. While I didn't like the return of the 3D overworld, the return of Destiny-style's full-body skits was a welcome return. Characters now appear much less blurry than they did in Destiny 2, and act much more animated, making these character interactions much more lively to watch, even if they are still in Japanese. Speaking about the characters, we once again find ourselves going back to a 6-member cast. Along with the 3 aforementioned characters, we are also joined by Annie Bars, a young humour girl who despises Kojima and seeks revenge on Eugene for the death of her father. We also meet Tai Tree Crow, a young factory worker whose sister also gets kidnapped by the King's Shield and joins the group with hope of rescuing all the kidnapped women. Lastly, we are joined by Hilda Rumbling, a fortune teller who also happens to be a half, a child born of both a humour and a Kojima, and is struggling with her identity as halves are rejected by both races. Along with playing as the 6 main characters, the gameplay will occasionally switch over to follow Claire Bennett's side of the story, in a similar manner to those Princess Peach parts in Paper Mario 64. These parts only involve a few pieces of dialogue, as Claire lacks any combat abilities. Speaking of combat capabilities, with each of the characters possessing their own specialised force powers, Tales of Rebirth does have somewhat of a shonen-like feel to it, with villains of the week frequently showing up with some unique force power to stop our protagonists. While this can be somewhat cliché, our characters can also use their force powers outside of combat to help with dungeon puzzles, with Mal being able to burn foliage, and Vague being able to make ice platforms. These new force powers mean that we no longer have the Sorcerer's Ring, making Tales of Rebirth the first main series game to drop the item. The Sorcerer's Ring isn't the only major series change. Due to Tales of Rebirth's unique healing system, items such as apple gels are no longer available at shops. While other gels such as the new peach gel are available, they are really expensive and are to be used sparingly. Thus cooking becomes the main way to heal the party outside of resting at inns. As a result, cooking has been vastly improved, with certain ingredients adding extra bonuses on top of the meal's base effect. Along with cooking, characters also have the ability to enhance their equipment to improve their stats. While I was not able to fully grasp every feature on offer from Tales of Rebirth, I still enjoyed its cast and its pseudo 3D art style. Tales of Rebirth carries its pseudo 3D aesthetic into its battle system with the introduction of the 3-line linear motion battle system, or 3LLMBS. Rather than a circular arena as seen in Tales of Symphonia, battles are now fought along 3 parallel lines. Each line acts as its own 2D battle space, like in the classic Tales games, and the player can jump between each of these lines by double tapping up and down respectively. Certain attacks like Mao's Wind Edge can also force characters into different lines as well. While combat for the most part remains contained to each individual line, more powerful attacks like Mao's Gale Slash can have multiple line hitboxes. While switching lines is easy, it should be noted that you are completely vulnerable to attacks both from the line you are leaving and the line you are moving on to, thus players should take care when they decide the time is right to switch lines. Before going into battle, it is important to set up the layout of your party in the tactics menu. This is because, unlike previous Tales games, your initial party layout will affect the base stats of your characters. By putting your character behind, next to, in front of each other, your characters will get bonuses from increased attack/defense to quicker force and health regeneration. Regular attacks return, but with the up arrow partly assigned to switching lines, combat is now much more grounded than it has been in the last few Tales games, with the characters unable to jump. While regular attacks are pretty well conducted in the same way they always have been, the skills have taken on a drastically different form. Tales of Rebirth abandons the TP system seen in all previous Tales games, and instead gives us the Force Cube. Outside of combat, skills, called Jitsua, can be assigned to one of 4 slots, which correspond to one of the 4 directions on the D-pad, including, for the first time, backwards. Along with Jutsu, each of the characters has their own Force Cube, which will apply special effects to the Jutsu. The Force Cube can be rotated around 3D space, such that 4 of its 8 corners will line up with the 4 Jutsu inputs. The Force Cube's corners will then dictate what special effect the respective Jutsus have, such as reducing cast time for spell Jutsu, or making follow-up attacks after hitting with a physical Jutsu. When in combat, the Force Cube appears as 4 diamonds that correspond to the 4 inputs. These diamonds contain force gauges that slowly fill out over time and will deplete when the corresponding art is used. Most Jutsu can be used at any time and still combo out of a regular attack. However, using the Jutsu without a full force gauge will result in a weaker attack, lacking any of the Force Cube bonuses. Thus it's strategic to only use Jutsu when the force gauge is full. The rate at which the force gauge restores is dependent on multiple factors, but one of the most notable factors is the rush gauge. The rush gauge appears as a bar next to your force gauge and represents your character's state of mind in battle. When it is low, your characters are in a calm state, and when it is high, your characters are in an enraged state. The rush gauge is filled by attacking the enemy, and is dropped by blocking attacks. The player can also manually raise and lower the gauge by holding up and down on the D-pad while guarding. In a cool state, your character will deal and take less damage, but will have the ability to heal through the use of their Jitsus. Your characters will also have reduced casting times and will recover from status effects faster. However, your ability to block multiple attacks is weakened, and if the rush gauge drops to 0, you will lose the ability to guard completely. Vice versa, when in an enraged state, your ability to defend is massively strengthened. You also deal and take more damage, and will have to deal with longer casting and recovery times. Your ability to heal from Jitsu will also drop, and in a fully enraged state, you will lose the ability to heal completely. When in an enraged state, your character will also lose the ability to perform powerful skills known as Ugi. Ugi can be bought and attached to Jutsu using smash points accumulated by repeatedly using the same Jutsu. When in combat, if a specific Jutsu is used, select diamonds on the Force Cube will then begin to glow silver. If a player then uses this specific Jutsu, the character will immediately fire off that Jutsu, along with the attached Ugi for massive damage. As the main protagonist, Vega is yet again probably the easiest character to play, with his ability to perform quick ice-based attacks despite his oversized sword. As the group's tank, Eugene is a bit slower than Vague, but has the benefit of using a spear with some far-reaching thrust attacks. Taitree is arguably the most technical of the melee fighters. Using his fists, he is able to dish out quick and rapid blows, but with his limited range, I frequently found his attacks missing any enemy that was more than a few steps away or in the air, thus I didn't tend to play him much. Mao and Hilda are the group's 2 casters, with Mao focusing on fire and wind spells, and Hilda focusing on lightning and water spells. Hilda is also more of a glass cannon, with her tarot cards giving her powerful magic attacks, while being a poor weapon in up-close combat. Meanwhile, Mao can do a decent amount of physical damage with his twin tonfas, allowing for decent melee play at the cost of weaker magic attacks. Finishing out the cast, we have Annie, who is one of the strangest Tales characters in her playstyle. Annie is the group's supporter, and as such, her jutsu consists of a bunch of stat buffing skills. However, instead of casting them directly onto the other party members, she instead casts a ring, which can be manipulated via the Force Cube to vary in size, position and duration. When players are inside one of these rings, they will gain the ring's benefits, and, if in a calm state, will also slowly regenerate their health, making Annie somewhat of the party's main healer. If you have all 6 of the characters in your party, you'll be able to unleash your most powerful attack in the form of the High Orgies. These attacks are slowly built up over multiple fights using an invisible gauge. When this gauge is full and there is only one enemy left in the battle, the player will be prompted to press the X button. When pressed, the player character will perform a powerful combo attack, which will finish off the final enemy and will net the party a larger reward afterwards. Altogether, the 3-line linear motion battle system takes the sharp focused gameplay of the 2D Tales games and merges it with the open movement of the 3D Tales games to make what might be one of my favourite battle systems in the entire series, and I would be amiss if I didn't mention those battle themes. We once again have our regular duo of Motoi Sakuruba and Shinji Tamura composing their 6th Tales game score, and I have to say, I really like the work they did here compared to Symphonia. We seem to be getting a trend here with the game's score qualities. Tales of Rebirth once again delivers an amazing soundtrack, with regular battle themes like Battle Organization and the boss theme Scruntum Fang, which, on a side note, makes a great theme for the 4 stars when played in its slowed down version Scruntum Cruel. Since the game is in Japanese, I can't really comment on the voice acting, other than saying that I like the fact that the skits are once again fully voiced. Going back to the topic of trends, while we once again get a strong in-game score, the title song is somewhat of a letdown. This time we have J-pop band Every Little Thing performing the song Good Night, which might be one of my least favourite Tales opening songs in the entire series. While I actually quite like the more ballad approach to the opening song, I cannot get past lead singer Kuroi Machida's vocals, especially when she goes into the higher ranges. Suffice to say, I prefer the vocalless karaoke version. As for the opening cinematic, well, it's kind of weird. Production IG once again handles the animation, but decides to begin the OP by doing some kind of slide reel introducing the characters along with their names, in English. It also ends with the final shot turning into some kind of painting. Yeah, I'm not sure what they were going for here. I will admit, after playing Tales of Rebirth, I am pretty close to becoming a Team Destiny fanboy, but we'll have to wait until I play Tales of the Abyss again before we make that decision. Much like with Team Destiny's last Tales game, we once again have a complex battle system that really tests out veteran Tales players like myself into thinking tactically when approaching battles. In fact, it might be the complex battle systems of this game and Destiny 2, which has grown my detest for the more simplistic battle systems of the last few Tales games. The Force Gauge is a very unique alternative to the normal TP systems that we have previously been accustomed to. The whole waiting for Jutsu to replenish after being used is very similar to how arts work in the Xenoblade Chronicles games. Maybe that's why I like this battle system so much. The whole 3-line combat too is such a unique idea, merging both 2D and 3D play into one battle system in a way that we have yet to see repeated. I said have yet to see repeated. If I can penalise this game for anything, it would be the somewhat small cast of less than stellar characters. Much like with Symphonia, we once again have a good but not incredible cast. While giving Vague a cold personality as poetic, it also puts him up there with Cress as one of the least interesting protagonists in the series due to his relative lack of dialogue. I also think the cast suffers from the lack of a troll character to bring out the laughs. While Taitri and Mao try to fill this role, they come up well short of characters like Zelos and Harold, as well as a certain necromancer in an upcoming retrospective. While the cast may have been a bit on the weak side, Tales of Rebirth once again delivers us an incredible JRPG adventure with another amazing battle system. Wow, we are 6 for 6 here. However, our hot streak might be coming to an end with our next review. Join me next time as I take a look at the black sheep of the PS2 Tales games, 2005's Tales of Legendia.